Not all these. Just tell your my bagel a little bit at a time. You might make it to lunch. Yeah, and we'll postpone. Yeah, it's all right. It's a little bit of a gray area. It is a gray area.
Okay, let's get going. I'm going to make a quick comment. The Zoom participants, you're all muted. Appreciate that. Just issue your questions and comments. We do have the Zoom group chat up on our screen here at the forum, so we'll try to keep an eye on that. The other thing you can also do is just email info@charlestonyachting.com, and that'll come to me too, and I'll see that. But use your group chat. Appreciate it. Great start. Appreciate the panel. You guys did a great job. Make sure you are speaking into the microphones. And then for the questions as well, we'll try to, we've got a microphone now passed over there, and I'll have mine on this side of the room. But since we are recording it, we need the microphones so that the voices appear on the recording properly. So, topic close and dear to my heart, I guess, but it's course management is our next topic. Course length and target times. And I'm going to throw this question out. I've seen target times, I wouldn't say abused, but it seemed like they were really, really important to people, and maybe not so much to the competitors. And, you had the risk of, not giving you the best course lengths, or you're also maybe risking some of the course itself by reducing and changing lengths of legs to accommodate these target times. I mean, I know it's important at the Olympic level when you've got the TV stations at the jibe mark and they want to be there at 2:35. But, what do we think about the importance of target times, and, what are the lengths of courses, 1 mile beat, or the half-mile beats? I know it, it depends on the size of fleets and things, but thought it was, worth a discussion here. And I will start off with Mr. Strassman on that one.
Okay, so target times are backing up 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Classes would always tell you that we want a 2 mile beat, 8 mile race. That's what we want. And whether it takes 45 minutes or 4 hours, we want a 8 mile race, or pick a number. And then the thinking changed, and rather than having a set distance, we have a set time, whether it's 1 hour or 90 minutes or 50 minutes or 25 minutes. I totally agree with Randy that you can get too myopic about hitting that target time, and you start doing suboptimal things with the race course to make it longer, shorter, whatever. If you have good breeze, the fleet will spread out. And from my friend, the gentleman from Texas, always says the same old sunburned faces are going to be in the front of the fleet. The same old sunburned faces are going to be at the front of the fleet, whether it's a 35-minute race or an 85-minute race. So, having said all of that, yes, if it's a windy race, a windy day, you can use your tables and attempt to get close. If it's a lighter air, you shorten things up. And remember, I said try to get close. I've done the things in Miami where there's a guy on the boat with a thing in his ear and says, "We're going to warning in 90 seconds." And it's kind of like okay, we're going to have a warning in 90 seconds. And, you know, and you have to do that. And it's made for TV. And I don't think it's particularly, the competition is very suboptimized when you start artificially altering a race that traditional races kind of have a rhythm. Heavy air races, you're banging out and you're exhilarated, and it might only be 35, 40 minutes, but you've raced around the race course and you're still panting pretty hard. And then in light air races, you certainly do want to, you know, contract it so you're not out there forever. You can have, even in light air races, you can have too short of a race. And you just have to, a target time of 50 minutes, and it's a light air race, and it's 75 minutes. But it's, you know, they're still moving, and everyone has enough room to get a lane, because if you contract the race course too tightly, no one has any space no lanes to do anything with. So, got to use common sense. In heavy air, I don't mind being short. In light air, I don't mind being long in terms of target times.
And we have classes that sometimes will dictate these target times as well, right?
Well, again, I think sailors understand, these are guidelines.
Right.
These are guidelines. And if you show good judgment and modify things to, at the end of the day, you have a good race. You have a good race, and that's what we're supposed to do. That's why we go out there, is have good races. They're guidelines.
Yep. I think there's maybe a bit of a change in how we've gone through, the times of where we have 4 or 5 races a day, kind of, whether it's us just kind of getting out of college and liking these short races. And I'm wondering if there's not a trend happening right now where people are actually kind of going back to the days where they had 2 long races versus 4 short races. And I know some classes have gotten to the point where they're limiting the number of races per day to 3, I think. So, good.
What I was going to say is, as a race manager, a race officer, and the class organizing authority tells you, we want to schedule 12 races. All right, pick a number, a large number of races. And I think race officers cannot get in the trap of saying, I gotta run 3 races. I mean, if it's a crappy day, don't try and pull the competitors through the muck to get your quota of races in that day. Often, like in match racing or team racing, you have these, multi-level eliminations and whatnot with, if you run all the races, you're going to have 144 races or something like that. And you set up the schedule so if the conditions are perfect, you'll get 12 races or 144 races. But you really should be able to suck it up and say, guys and ladies, this is really a crappy day to sail. And maybe we can get 1, but I'm not going to try and get 3 or 4 today when it is really a suboptimal day. That's something I think the competitors appreciate that, who've been around the block a few times, that quality trumps quantity all the time. But there are some parental units in some small square boats that think that gosh darn it, I signed up for 12 races today, and why aren't you running 12 races today? Well, there you go. I think you have to go with quality.
And Randy, I think the other thing that's happening is, as the sailing population ages, The fact that we used to like to do 5 races. Currently today, if I do 3 long races in the J22 or the J70, that's plenty of racing for me. And I also, as a PRO, have to look at the back half of the fleet, recognizing that the front half of the fleet will race until the cows come home, as they say in Texas. But the back half of the fleet really wants to go and have a beer. And so after a while, you have to recognize that you're here for the entire group. And if you don't keep the back half of the fleet coming back, then your regatta is going to be smaller. Your championship is going to be smaller next year. So you have to sort of, for safety purposes and for entertainment purposes, look at the back half of the fleet and see how they're doing, how much fun they're having, to keep them out there, and whether or not you should have another race that day or not.
I'm going to put Jeremy on the spot. He does a lot of sailing with a lot of different customers, and what are they looking for?
Basically, John said this earlier. It's most of the owners that I race with just don't want their time wasted, and so the efficiency is the most important thing. At the same time, with the quality, I think one of the best things I ever heard from a race officer, Anderson Reggio, was we were at the Melrose 24 Worlds, and we needed 3 races that day. At the start of the day, he said, we're only going to get 2. And we had 6 knots of breeze all morning, but there was 20-degree shifts. And he knew at 3 o'clock there was 12 knots coming. And he waited the whole day until 3 o'clock to get those 2 races. I think that type of structure and sticking with your game plan is really important as a race committee, and just sticking to your guts.
Communication.
Yeah.
That's great. Any other comments about how we're changing things up, or are we still trying to put in as many races a day as we can, or lengths? I mean, I know that that's another, trying to stretch out some legs when we can. I think at that Worlds, right, we had 2 other marks. Was that the Miami Worlds?
Yeah, Miami.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was frustrating because that whole, I mean, he let the whole fleet know ahead of time. Like every night, he told the whole fleet what his plan was the next day. And in the morning, if anything changed, he let the whole fleet know again. And it was just, he kept it really efficient with the owner's time, like the sailors, the crew can be there all day. We don't care. But the owners really need to have their schedules lined up. And for this one, I was just very impressed. He had a lot of pressure from a lot of people in the fleet saying, we can race in this, we can race in this. But it was really shifty. It was going to be a really bad race. And he just kept waiting. And we ended up having 2 amazing races in like world-class sailing. And what he did there was not run a dodgy race that would have affected the championship. He ran 2 very good races where the championship was decided and went to the best team, not something flaky.
Yeah, he did a great job there.
Yeah,
thank goodness. But yeah, it's important that you commit to 10 or 12 races, and you feel like this, oh, I've got to get these races in today, and you end up starting a race in 6 knots of breeze or something, and maybe that's not necessarily the best thing for the competitors. You have to just be patient and give a quality race. We have the issues here, where we have so much current, and I'm going to use the August 24 class because I think they've got a 6 knot, minimum to start a race. Well, 6 knots and 2.5 knots of current isn't going to work, and then the other aspect of it is that 6 knots got to be all the way across the course, and it's just not usually happening. There's going to be spots, and then all of a sudden the race isn't quite so fair anymore.
And remember, when you have 2 or more knots of current, that really affects the sailing breeze. That if you're on an anchored committee boat, that's not what the sailors are experiencing while they're sailing around untethered in the current. So when you, particularly out here, you cannot take wind readings off an anchored boat. So keep that in mind.
Has there been any, has anybody done the homework to say, you know, what amount of breeze is needed for X amount of current? I mean, you know, we used to have that kind of calculation. Or were they doing that? They were doing that for the big breeze in San Francisco for the America's Cup, where they had these criteria. But and we don't have anything within our sport that kind of has a table for that kind of information that would help us out.
Generally, all of these numbers, like 6 knot minimums, 4 knot minimums, blah, 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 are taken from a floating boat, free floating boat.
Yep.
That's about the only guideline I'm aware of.
That's a good point. I mean, I'm going to say an experience where, you know, we had all the sophisticated wind rating, wind speed information, but it was on an anchored pin boat, for instance, you know. We had, you know, and we had the minimum breeze questioned and challenged, you know, and sure enough, he had all the data, you know, he had the computer, he had all the logs, here it is. But yeah, it was a anchored boat, not a moving boat.
Randy, since we're talking about best practices for the PROs that have gone to a new venue that they haven't been to before, how important is that local knowledge that you want on board?
Yeah.
All right. As one who parachutes in a lot, you find your new very best friend from the local yacht club, and you know. Matt, what happened? What just happened here? And so he can explain. And yeah, when you see that line coming in, you know, or you know, don't bother going out until this afternoon when that 12 knot breeze comes in. It's incredibly important. You look so smart if you listen to those smart local guys.
Dick.
I've often wondered about the U.S. and world sailing policy of parachuting in PROs. I think at the least in the manuals and the appointment processes for both organizations, there should be a guideline that there's an assistant PRO or the number 2 on the race committee is someone from the local area who knows the weather, current, and wind conditions for that area. I remember an event where a PRO parachuted into my hometown and ran a national championship there that we were very proud to be hosting. And it was a terrible event. And it was largely this fellow's fault because he thought he knew enough to do it, and no names to no years to protect the innocent.
Well, I can speak, you know, on Race Week that where we're very conservative with our PROs because they've had the experience, you know, to bring someone in, you know, fly them into Race Week into Charleston Harbor. It just wouldn't be fair. You know, it's really tricky. And you know, one of our better PROs, I mean, he'll have somebody in his back pocket, you know, that's his wind sniffer, you know, so that the two of them, they're 2 big time competitors, both very good sailors, and he can see that sea breeze coming in and they anticipate the shift and they know the harbor really, really well. And it makes a big difference. So, you know, somebody else who couldn't make this meeting, you know, we talked about, you know, we have PROs that are really, really great sailors, and we have PROs that would be, you know, an average sailor. And, you know, how do you get, you know, that racing experience to that particular PRO? And we talked about instituting like a caddy. In other words, you would grab, you know, if you're managing a particular fleet, well, maybe there's another top sailor that's involved in a class that's not sailing that day, and get them on that boat for that local knowledge and that feel for what the sailor wants and what's going to happen on the lake to anticipate ships. And that was kind of a novel idea, you know, because it's hard to find people to support everybody. But having that second, you know, you're focusing on actually running the race. This guy's actually focusing on the breeze and what's going on, on the course itself. There's a big advantage. Any other questions? I wish I could read it. Inland lake sailors, who care about them? No, that's what the lake sailors are. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'll get up close so I can actually read it. Let's see. All right, inland lake sailors and club level events would rather just go, I've found. Keep getting feedback to just go with it. This junk is all we get to go to work with.
That's a normal occurrence on some lakes deep and westward in the coast, especially in the Carolinas and Georgia, the ones that I've worked at. And you really do have to do a change of your mindset when you're going to a lake, and if you're used to being on the harbor or on the ocean, you're going to have a mindset change that says, okay, I have to adapt my thinking toward what are we going to get? What is my best option? Where's my local knowledge? But you're going to really have to put your faith in that local knowledge until you kind of get used to what's going on. And you're just going to have to get a lot of wind readings. What's the shift? What's the pressure coming down at me? And you really do have to just go with it.
Yes.
Best friend?
I've been involved in trying to get the race committee established for some local regattas where they're bigger than average, where we're bringing in outside competitors. It's important for a qualification or whatever. And we've been using a process where we try to pair up a superb sailor with a competent race officer. And the competent race officer keeps the superb sailor process that manages the details. And the superb sailors, we're finding, are often great at saying, if we just move the course over here, the wind's going to be better. And, they've thought about how the wind blows in the area, and that knowledge is deeper than the typical race officer will have. And so that pairing has proved very helpful.
And you can see that, getting yourself set up for the day in a position that, oh, by the way, that breeze is going to go right later in the day. Let's get yourself situated, and anticipate those types of shifts and stuff so that you're not having to pick up everything and move over to somewhere else. Keep your options open too. I think you see that many times where the single boat is kind of fixed where it is and doesn't move, and because the amount of time it would take to move and reset and everything. And if it had teed up in the right spot in the beginning, you'd improve the quality of the course, I think, pretty significantly.
I think this is an opportunity for race committee officers to use coaches and sailors. I think it's important that relationship become better and easier and less offensive, because there's a lot of work that goes into a top team getting to a venue that they may never sailed at before, and you get these fantastic coaches who ultimately become weathermen for their teams. And I think there's a real opportunity for race officers to learn from the coaches and the sailors. If you know a big wind shift is coming, make sure your boat's not in a position to where you're going to be pinned to where you're going to have to relocate the committee boat. I really think there's a lot to be said for being open to what some of the sailors and the coaches are willing to say and help you out.
Yeah, we talked about the videotaping of starts and stuff. The resources of the sailors today that we're trying to run races for are almost unending. I mean, people have the best weather information. I mean, they're going to have way better weather information than we might have as a PRF. And the information they're going to have for the day's sailing is pretty significant. and they've also got trainers on the course too.
Well, I think it goes back to our goal is to not waste time. We're not telling you something because that's going to give us an advantage. We're telling you something that'll hopefully get the race off quarter and be more productive on the water. Any sailor will tell you, wasting time on the water is probably their biggest pet peeve. And so I think that's something to be said for that. And it should be taken as such and not as we don't think you're doing a good job. It's what can we do to help you, get things going, make sure that the sailors are comfortable. I think the class liaisons help a lot in this regards with knowing what the competitors want out of a race committee.
Yeah, and as far as this race management, just make sure that your teams and your PROs have good quality information starting, for that day, because the sailors are going to have it, so you've got to be at least, have that similar level of information that helps, because it's all about time. Other big topic, are, changing of course. When we've got our course laid out, when do we change? What's a big enough shift to make everybody move things around? I think some guidance is usually, from what I've heard, is 10 degrees is okay. 15 not so much. You have different classes that have different bias. Now, Jeremy, I think you could fill me in maybe, but what Anderson was doing at the Miami Worlds, for instance, we had some debate about the bias he was doing because of the current and setup of the course there. And what he was trying to do is he would skew the weather mark a little bit to keep things square on a run because of the current going across the course, right?
Yeah, he ran into a bit of criticism about that, mainly for the first upwind beats. The majority of it was on port. But it really wasn't that bad. I mean, the whole idea is when you come off the start, you want to give the fleet enough time so that everyone who gets a good start at the pin, everyone flops evenly. So it's not like this huge chaos train on the port hand ley line, which will end up in disaster at the top. So even though he had the mark skewed, the first beat actually worked out really well. Everyone was laid up pretty nicely going, on port. It was skewed. Yeah. Long tack was port. But the downwinds, I mean, it's that's when you really want to spread out a fleet like that, especially in that breeze. You having that many boats going that fast. I think it's a lot better to plan for the downwinds than the upwinds.
Right, and that was
get that fleet apart.
That was his thought process on it. I mean, the boats are pretty aggressive downwind too, so it's very tactical downwind. I mean, downwind squareness is as important.
Where like everything that's coming up here, it is very relative on the venue, the boats. Like you can't do that with an Etchells.
Right.
You can do that with a skiff, but it works for what fleet you're working with. So
remember, rule number one is do nothing. I can't tell you how many times it's the wind shifted 10 degrees. I'm going to take that bite, going to move it over there. And then you get the call back. I just raised the anchor with 150 horsepower windlass. Probably won't have your mark in the water in time. And then you have to start scrambling. So as you watch wind shifts, remember the capabilities of your crew and the time frame you're going to give them to do it in. And the old adage is do nothing. So a 10-degree wind shift with a mark in the wrong place is much better than no mark at all when you're halfway through a race.
We've always had, we talk about sailing and current a lot because that's what we do here, and you can go into the race management guide, and it'll talk about walking a course, which I've never really done, but it sounds awfully risky to me. I mean, I can't imagine, but it would be, taking in Miami, it would have been taken and then walking the leeward course as the current went, and it would have kept both legs square. But I just can't imagine that being a practical thing to do.
I think it's a great idea. It works really well on paper. It's really hard to pull off on the water. You have to have a lot of people and a lot of talent to move a course down and a lot of runway to make that happen. So as you would like to do that, once again, it's loaded with possibilities of failure.
Yeah. Okay. I got more hands How many people have walked the course in their life?
I've used it.
Yeah.
And West Palm, places in Florida on the coast where the Gulf Stream is
Yep.
close to the beach, we've done it in August 32s where every mark was moved. Takes proper equipment, ground tackle, power boats.
Yeah, was it a good race or not? It was a good race. Okay, thank you.
Was there just one class on the course? Okay. That makes a big difference too.
Randall?
You run so many possibilities on the English coast, but you can set them, you can make a triangle out of it. Set your leeward mark where you would be walking the leeward mark through if you had one with leeward course. Then you end up with a funny little reach, but it's almost like an offset. You can do it without moving your marks. People won't be happy when they see it the first time, but it works.
Right.
We do it, it has to be there in Charleston sometimes, we don't do it. You get a good windward leg and then you get a reach.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's what will happen. You end up with a one jibe run. If you're trying to get, working too hard.
That's all. If you did the leeward mark, make it a wing mark.
Interesting. Well, at least it was good to ask you guys because, I can really see. It seemed like the old risk management on a walking course would be a challenge. Yeah. And I'm going to circle back to Jeremy because I was involved in that worlds, right? So I have but as a 2 leg, so what we did, we sent them off on about 1.5 miles first leg. We had 75 boats. And then we brought the leg in 0.5 mile for the rest of the course. Would that have given an opportunity to kind of re-square? Were we making a mistake? I'm not going to say we were making a mistake, but would we have been able to reposition that second weather mark differently to square things up a little bit better for that second beat?
I don't see why not. I see it actually happened in Marblehead a lot of the time, the J70 Worlds, when they do that, they make the next leg, the adjustment, and shorter.
Yeah.
It kind of, the good thing about shortening the leg on fleets like that is when you've got boats that fast, the fleet is kind of pretty spread out by the bottom mark, so you can bring it in. And it does actually force the race committee to be proactive in that area.
Yeah.
Give 2 really good upwinds.
Yeah. Mark, did you have something? No? I'm just taking notes because we've got the August 24 Worlds here in 2020, and we could be doing just that. Exactly. That's why these questions, they're personal questions I've got.
Because of course management, one of the things I get concerned about is having a long weather leg and a second weather leg being much shorter because you're starting off with a relatively long starting line for the long weather leg. So you have a bunch of ocean to sail in. You bring them through a gate, you squeeze them down to 10 boat lengths, and now you've shortened up the next weather leg, which you made the second diamond much smaller, which means there's not a lot of passing lane. So as a competitor, I frown on shortening courses by very much. And as a PRO, I realize that by doing that, I've affected the race by shortening it. So I'd much rather have a little bit longer race and have that second weather leg be almost the same length. And also, if you do that, then you pretty much set the fleet because there's not going to be a lot of places to pass. So if you take the second weather leg and shorten it by a lot, the time to the top, instead of being 25 minutes, is now 15 minutes. And there's just no place to pass. So I get nervous about shortening courses. I'd much rather prefer have 2 weather legs. And my first weather leg in general is a minimum on a big fleet of 4 times the starting line length. And that has to do with trying to take the bias of the angles out. When you end up with a shorter weather leg than that, your biases from each end of a long starting line get to be pretty extreme, up to 15 degrees. If you're not managing it correctly. So a 10 degree, 15 degree wind shift one direction or the other, you can lay the weather mark from one end. So I'm concerned about weather leg length and then also shortening.
I mean, I think our concern with that particular event was, we needed to get those 75 boats spread out a little bit, and then we brought it back in. But, I think it was still a mile leg, right? I think it went from 1.5 to
it that much.
Yeah. And I wonder if it's, the ability to actually shift it, it's not just bringing it in straight back in, maybe, as if it was maybe the breeze has gone left a little bit, so you have the ability to change the direction.
Well, anytime you're putting the change flag up, you can
Yeah,
move
you
it
can
left or right or in or out. So
Yeah. Yeah.
take advantage of making, if you're going to put a change flag up, put it where it's supposed to be. Don't just move
Yeah,
it
exactly.
someplace.
Yeah, I don't think you're just bringing it straight in. Great. Any questions from the? It's pretty quiet.
Yeah, as far as the current bias, as a tactician, I actually count on that affecting my strategy. If we've got current ripping right to left across the beat, I know I've got to spend a lot more time on port. Then I'm going to probably not set up at the left end of the line if I don't have the ability to get onto port right away. So if we're going to be shifting the course around, then that takes that kind of predetermined strategy out of the equation. And I honestly prefer to have that as a variable that I can take advantage of compared to somebody who's not considering a current bias across the course. So I'd prefer for the course to be maybe marginally skewed and the marks to stay in the same spot.
As far as like, okay, so now we're going to change the mark. And I know World Sailing's got a nice little guidelines, I think, with the amount of degrees that you need to be seen to actually call the change, right? It's 10. I want, the reason I'm asking is, again, I guess I'm drawing on some experience, but, you get a 20, 25 degree shift, and you're changing to that. When does the shift even come into an abandonment, I guess? But, you're doing these changes to avoid abandonments. John, Mark?
The rule is don't change for less than 10 degrees.
Yeah. Change.
It's 25 or 30 degrees in the first weather leg, you can abandon.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter, they don't want you, even with a 45 degree shift, if you can keep up with moving marks, they prefer you to do that.
Yeah.
The biggest thing they always watch for is flipping the fleet. So if you have a shift big enough where the fleet inverts, that's when you have to start thinking about abandoning it. You don't want to wind shift to invert the fleet.
Right. Cool. I guess, we've touched on this, too. I mean, we've got this risk management, and, moving stuff around and getting marks, that resetting marks and having the risk of having them drag, having them run over by boats, things of that nature, too. That can happen, and not being able to get marked boats in time to replace the run over marks. I'm wondering, again, like what you're saying, don't move it, or don't shorten, keep your moves to a minimum so that you don't have, as far as a race committee, you don't have the exposure, of something going awry. And John, you want to kind of, what here?
Absolutely. That good sailors can deal with stuff happening out on the race course. They understand, the new breeze is coming in. And that they'll just sail to it. Race officers can get too precious about doing absolutely the perfect thing and totally screw up a race. So I'm kind of a minimalist, much like Mark is, that if it's if it's walking right, well, okay, let's follow it. If it's just going bang, bang, back and forth, they're smart, let them figure it out. Let them sail, and don't try, and the race officers should inject themselves minimally into the results of the race. That, it's a big, if it's a huge shift and the fleet inverts, blow it off, let's try it again. If it's, over the course of the day, it's, going 5 degrees every half hour, well, all right, so you cheat a little bit, then you move it a little bit from the next leg, and and kind of keep it going. But it's hard to have perfect knowledge out there. No one has perfect knowledge what's going on. Every Charlie is an educated guess what we're doing, and sometimes we get burned. And so, like Mark said, doing nothing is always an option. It might be an unsatisfactory answer, but sometimes less is more for Charlies.
Great. Dick?
There's a part of Rule 32 that says that race committee may abandon the race for any other reason directly affecting the fairness of the competition. And I have not seen it spelled out what criteria are good ones to use. I'm hearing some ideas here. An oscillating wind, the oscillations are not affecting the fairness of the wind. That's part of the skill of the game. I developed a criterion that I wrote about a few years ago, but it hasn't. Didn't receive a lot of feedback on it. I'm curious what people think. My criterion for blowing up a race is if the boats are becalmed and an unable to respond when they see the new wind coming in, so that it picks up the fleet, and people haven't had there's been enough period of calm that they haven't been able to position for the new wind. That's a time to abandon. But if they keep moving and the wind makes a major shift and they are enabled to look and position themselves, then I would not abandon. But I'm interested in how that sentence is used, and comments on it.
Looking at the other part of that rule, if you abandon that race, even after another boat has finished the race, you got that little clause in there that says that you have to give consideration to the consequences for boats that have raced in that race or series. Now, there's no guidance or direction anywhere that you can find that says what should that consideration entail. You have any insight there on how we would apply that based on what you just said?
I think it's very risky to blow up a race when one or more boats have finished, because somebody won that race, and presumably you hadn't abandoned it, so it was a fair test of skill for that person, that crew. And the purpose of a race is to determine the winner, and then once he's finished, second place, and so on. But I was thinking more in my comments a minute ago about a race where nobody has yet finished, and you're making the decision. And that certainly is an important decision for the PRO. The decision to abandon after boats have already finished, I think I would be very reluctant to do it. It just is going to set off a firestorm between the ones who won and the ones who were having a bad race and think, whoa, that's great. And to me, if you've won, you've won. And then I would not want to abandon a race unless there was some danger to the fleet. And even then, I would think of asking for redress for the fleet rather than abandoning the race, and giving, if 5 boats finish, give everybody else 6th place if you want. That's fairer than blowing off the race for those 5 who managed to finish and beat the other people. But I don't know that those are controversial decisions, and I'd be interested to hear how people have handled them.
Sometimes poorly.
It's a hard one.
I had to do exactly what he was talking about. I had one boat finish. I had a 10-minute time limit for the next boats. 4 more boats were going to finish, and there was an 81 boat fleet. Everyone else would have gotten an 82nd, which would have ended the regatta for 76 boats. The regatta would have been over at that point because of a 76. So that race did get abandoned. Back to considering the consequences for everybody in the fleet, realizing that I was not going to label 76 boats with an 82nd place.
That leads to what I think will be a change in the rules. There's a lot of people talking about it, that when you have the secondary time limit, the race is 1 hour for the first boat, and then anybody who doesn't finish within 20 minutes is scored DNF. Well, the fair thing, I think, there is to say anybody who doesn't finish gets the place, or there's an argument for 2. 1 or 2 places worse than the last boat that completed the course within the time limit. And that, I think, should become the standard for sailing instruction to use when we use the secondary time limit. That would have at least partly helped you.
It would have, and they didn't add that that was not in the sailing instructions. Specifically wanted to take that part of it out. So that is an alternative, and it's scored TLE, but if you look under the scoring abbreviations, TLE is not there. So you have to work with your scoring program so that they can insert that in there so you can add that a TLE to your scoring abbreviations.
There's a case where the U.S. reps to World Sailing are working on this, and that's Jim Capron and myself. We both support this change, and we're looking for wording. So anybody who wants to suggest where we would go in the rule book and what wording we would use, and whether it should be TLE should be number of finishers plus 1 or number of finishers plus 2, that kind of argument is interesting. So we're interested in that.
Raise your hand again.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just a suggestion, Nick, ping Jeff Johnson on that, because he had proposed that for the upcoming Star Western Hemisphere Championship, and he had good language. We can't do it because it's against the class rules, but he had written that in and with good language. So that might be helpful.
Also, Thistle. Yeah. It's a complicated formula, but yeah. Good. So, you've got a week-long regatta, and you've had a race that's kind of went out of the norms of a 30-degree shift or something, and you've had the kind of fleet invert, and you abandon the race. You get a bunch of real angry sailors because there were some good places that they earned in that race. And you get, as a PRO, you get given a really hard time. So 2 days later, that similar shift comes in, but now it's from the other side. And you go, well, I'm not going to go through that redress again. And you don't abandon the race. So you get to go through that redress drill all over again. And I think the point being, I think these guys are pretty good, but the point I'm trying to make is that, I think as we run regattas and events, we have to be really careful with what precedents we set. And maybe that race was fair, the second race that didn't get abandoned, but the problem is that a similar race did get abandoned like that. So, how do you guys manage that?
It's, Mark, it's a very good concept not to manage the results of the regatta from the signal boat. However, there's also another phrase that might shock, that the job of a PRO is to make sure the right person wins the regatta. Now, What? What was that? Well, you are saying that you want the most skilled person to win the regatta. And if you have a race that turns into a crapshoot, and like Dick was saying, that the fleet has been becalmed, and you see the new sea breeze filling in from 120 degrees over your right shoulder, and the last will be first, and first will be last. That's a crapshoot, and that is, while you don't want to manage the results, you also don't want someone to lose the regatta because of an act of God.
Would that not be a fair race when you have that kind of condition occur? It's no longer a fair race.
Exactly.
Again.
Yes.
Oh.
JD told me this some time ago, that we have the condition of fairness that is always upon us, and we have so many different changes and so forth that we get into a judgment situation a lot of times. All the things you're talking about, it really comes down to, if your people trust you, you won't have a problem.
In talking about fairness, going back to starting signals and consistency, if you ever start using an I flag as your first penalty, you really need to be consistent about that, because if you think about, you use an I flag for the first start and people have to go around the ends. Next start, you decide, well, that didn't work as well as I want. I'll use a Z flag for my next penalty. Now someone just has to dip the line to clear themselves. So make sure when you're starting with penalty flags, you stay consistent through the event. So if you decide an I flag is your next go-to move, don't just arbitrarily blow that one away one time and jump into a Z flag or a U flag, because then you've affected the fairness of the race as you've penalized people at a different level and a different start, back to abandoning a race one time and not abandoning it the next time.
Right.
With the PROs, you have to have thick skin and recognize, at least from my viewpoint, is I always say, would I really want to continue this race? If I was out there, would I think it would be fair? And if I can't live with that, then I don't have a problem doing it. Yeah, you have a few people who are pissed off, and you have a whole bunch of people that usually are saying yay and saying, why did it take you so long? So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But it's consistency. I mean, this is just some things I've seen where, bases have been abandoned, and then a similar situation happens again, and it doesn't get abandoned. It's important to, I think, as a guideline would be, well, I did this once, we've got to do it again. Or look at the particular instance and see, well, yeah, if I abandon this race now, I'm going to avoid redress, and I can turn around and sail it again. And work it that way, and know that you've got that ability to. But it's just sometimes we have to be careful, because there's a lot of lobbying going on that you're having to deal with as a PRO, and you've got to sit down and kind of insulate yourself. And if you have these criteria, and the piece of this event here is really to try to give race committee or ROs, that information and input to draw on, so that the decision is made consistently. John, you had a...
No, I think consistency is the most important thing. Talking about quality of the racing, and the wind shifts is relative. Sailing on a lake is going to be different than sailing out in the ocean. But maintain consistency in how you're running the races. If you're blowing off races for certain wind shifts, then I think you need to be consistent about blowing off those races. If you're going to let one stick, I think you need to be okay with that and follow through with, that's the way that I'm going to run this regatta. I think where you'll get sailors mad at you is when you start being inconsistent, because then it starts favoring different people in different situations. And I think that will be frustrating for the sailors.
I think that's good. Another lesson I kind of learned from Anderson, that seems to help me, because I'm so kind of, seems like, all you guys are friends and you know who they are on the boats. Anderson, it was a bow number. He knew you know, he didn't care it was just, he was a bow number, to Anderson. So it made decisions and his thought process and stuff a lot clearer. You know, he took the personal piece out of the puzzle too, because it does get personal, you know.
As a PRO, I never look at results during a regatta. I can't tell you. I walked up to the winner of the J70 Worlds and said, "How'd you do?" And he said, "We won." I said, "Congratulations." And he was just perplexed. I didn't know. But I could not tell you who's ever in what place in a regatta unless I'm called in for redress and they ask me that I have to look up their scores. Otherwise, as a PRO, I couldn't tell you it's a bow number, and I couldn't tell you who's associated with the bow number, and I couldn't tell you what place they were in.
Yes.
Just quickly, I mean, I agree with Mark with regards to I agree with Mark that consistency is important, but I'd also say if you learn from your mistakes, make a change. So consistency is good, but making the wrong decision 3 times is probably worse than making it once and fixing it. So that's the only thing I've learned from it. We all make mistakes, admit them. The other comment that I'd make is communication with classes. You asked the question earlier about the time limits and stuff like that. Sometimes the classes, what they want this year is slightly different than what they wrote last year or 5 years ago, and they haven't quite changed. So make sure you get the current understanding as opposed to what was written down in sort of the guidelines 5 or 10 years ago. I raced in the lightning class, and we've still got triangles, and every once in a while somebody wants to run one, and most of our guys don't want to have it. So, if you just read the guidelines, you'd be sort of splitting windward lures and triangles, and you'd be lynched on the second triangle. So just a thought there. The other one is meetings. I think Mark mentioned it earlier. Meetings after the regatta, after the racing, at the end of the day, and a debrief in the morning. I found that is absolutely critical for understanding what the coaches and the competitors are doing. I try and run it almost all the time. Every day, just even if it's a 10-minute, this is what happened yesterday, this is what we did right, we think, and what we did wrong, we think, and what do you think, and let's go from there. Thank you.
It's great that I've actually experienced your morning briefs, and that, we do that at a national level, events or world events, but, giving that insight in the morning of what your plan is, and that's what, Anderson was doing, via email and radio. Again, the communication and being able to adjust as the event, needs or requires. So it's important. All right, what have we got here next? Guys, we're running through this thing ahead of schedule. I'm just saying.
Can I give you a hint?
Yeah.
All right. When we started thinking about this, one of the items that came up was how can we increase the skill of decision making that needs to be involved on the race committee. And we kind of talked about that a lot, and we've addressed some of it here. But your decision making skills are critical when you are the PRO and you're leading this group on the race committee. The things that you are making decisions about usually involve an aspect of the rules and also something that some action you need to take that involves you're about to assume some risk. So there's an element of risk management. There's an element of knowing what the rules say and what you would expect something, the results of a bad decision may end up in the room and you're getting a redress issue. But I would like to open the floor, if nothing else, Randy, as to what do we consider good decision-making skills?
It's a good question. Yeah.
Good point.
Take that information in. Use your experience, use your judgment, and make a decision. I couldn't do 100% right. And if you're wrong, I'm going to do that next time.
I think the fact that a lot of times we do learn more by our mistakes, at least I do, because you kind of feel pretty bashful when you come back to the club that night and you're looking at everybody in the face. But if you can learn something from that and then pass it on to your, anyone you're trying to help is an aid to them. But we've got some star players up here. What do y'all use as a fundamental basis on your decision making?
Not making a decision is making a decision. So you do have to remember that the do nothing concept is making a decision to do nothing. The other side about it is, from my personal perspective, I spend about 40% of my time still sailing and 30% running races and 30% judging. So I always look at it from what would I expect if I was a competitor and what would I be happy with if I was a competitor. And that's the decision-making process. And also the decision-making process has to do with execution. I think we're going to talk that down later on, but remember, you've got a team out there and the team can perform at a certain level. And as long as you don't push them into the corner, they're going to look like rock stars. You push them in the corner, you're going to find out what they're made out of and find out whether or not the competitors are going to appreciate the fact you blew a race up for them trying to make a decision that is a risky one. So when they're screaming at a lure mark and you got 30 seconds to get a Charlie up and you realize it's an 8-minute beat and you've got to get a weather mark put in, telling someone to make a Charlie flag and signal everything and getting it set up and making a go of it, and then recognizing your weather mark may or may not get in the water with no preempt into that is a risky decision. So those decisions are made based on the capabilities of your team, and it is a team. Everyone's involved, and so and we'll talk about that this afternoon. But I think that's the biggest part about making a decision is, what do you think the competitors, and if you were a competitor, what would you expect the race committee to do in this situation to keep the race as fair as it can possibly be?
Well, and there's another thing about risk management is the time horizon, that the closer you get in time and the closer you get in distance, your options decrease. You do have to keep pushing your thought process farther and farther out, so that if you do a Charlie, you have to give all your players time to execute it. If you give them no time to execute it, it's going to turn into dirt. However, if you keep pushing it farther, your decision horizon farther and farther out, and even if you make saying what ifs, okay, weather mark, what are you getting? I'm getting 10 degrees to the right. Please prepare, move into position, keep everything in the boat, report back in 90 seconds. So you're try and build more time into the execution stage of your plans. And it's kind of, new age and crystal, powers of crystal I'm talking about right now. But that is something that's almost could be taught, where you're pushing your decision farther and farther out, and that builds more time for your team to execute it.
And remember, as a PRO, I spend more time as a PRO working on my weather and my tactics than I was a tactician. And back to John's comment, I go find all the coaches I can find. Anyone I know, I go find and say, hey, what's going on the race course today? What do you guys think? Where do you think I should set up? And should I anticipate a 25-degree right-hand shift? And if I am I going to put myself in the right position so I'm not wasting time between picking up the circus and taking it to a new location? So back to John's comment, you got to stay out. As a tactician in a sailboat, I stay about a half a leg in front of the boat. As a race officer, I have to stay a leg and a half in front of it because I have other people that have to be involved in it. And I have to communicate that back to my team. As John said, okay, you're seeing a 10-degree left shift. The good weather mark guys will say, move to that position and say, already there, getting ready to blow up the mark, tell me if you don't want this to happen. So they anticipate and are proactive and not reactive. And that's something you can always, in your team, instill, as you remember to pass down the authority, responsibility of making decisions further and further out so that at the end of the day, you have managed yourself out of a job. And if you can manage yourself out of a job, that means that if you drop dead on a boat, the race will go on and everyone will take care of it for you. But at training your team and giving them that responsibility and authority generates a lot of goodwill within the team also. But as a PRO, you're a tactician, and so anybody you can find, whether it's a friend you know on the fleet, if they have a coach, if you happen to know that coach, if you don't know the coach, go find the coach and ask him what's going on. Coaches are very open to help the race committee, as John mentioned, run a really good race. They prefer to have a well-run race than to go out there and have you stumble around, and they'd much rather share their knowledge with you to end up with a good race and to be quiet and keep all the information to themselves. Recognizing you're not going to pass off information to other competitors, you're just going to use it for your own use. On a regular basis, when I go to major regattas, I get 3 or 4 emails with different weather forecasts from teams just saying, here, just use this today just so you have it. Knowing that I may have a different weather forecast, but they all send it to me so I have knowledge.
Comes down to communication, and, like someone said earlier, knowing who the customer is, and utilize the information. I want to say that some people will, I'm trying to figure out a proper way to do this, but they get intimidated by the coaches, or they think that the coach is out for that individual he's working for, and they're not. I think what Jeremy said, they're your customers. They're just speaking on behalf of the customer, making sure that customers have a good time. And that's important. It's really important for us to consider.
One of the coaches told me one time, I asked him what it was like to be in the coaching business. He said, I'm not in the coaching business. I'm in the entertainment business. I make sure the guy that's paying me has a good time. And I guess as race officers, we're in the entertainment business. We have to make sure that the competitors that we are serving and the OA we're representing are having a good time and want to come back and do it again. So as a PRO, I realize that I report to the OA. The OA is the person I have to make look good. The club has to look good so that the competitors, while they're on the shore, have a good time, but while they're on the water, they have a good time, so that the next time that club hosts a major event, everyone goes, oh, they run great regattas. We want to go back there. So as a PRO, I think we have to recognize that the rules state that we report to the OA, but then we deal with the customers. So as Randy talked about earlier, there's 3 people that we're working for at any given time on a race course.
So that's like a key element. If you are in the process of trying to build attendance at your regatta, that's exactly what you want to do. And I think everybody has that problem with getting enough people to come to your event. So if you're keeping your customer at first, the OA and everybody else, you're going to do well. They're going to be back next year, hopefully.
Oh, Randy alluded to that with the Charleston Race Week with the 200 plus volunteers. He manages to get up on race committee to make sure that they're all there and what they're there for, and manage to grow an event because even though he's cramming 6 circles in an area that ought to have 3.
I used to say some of these people in this room know, I can remember Randy pounding his fist on the harbor's only big enough for 1 course. Yeah. I think I probably was right 10 years ago, right? But, just try to keep those customers happy. Make a bigger harbor. You had a question in back?
Everything we do from the time we go in the water to the time we come back directly affects the fairness of the competition. So every decision you make, you need to assess the risk reward of, if I do this, what will happen? If I don't do this, what will happen? And judge it based on the fairness of the competition for everybody on the course.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking more so when I'm looking at a fleet trying to run races, fleet with a wide variance of skill sets. What are, in your experience, from high competition to more community, wide variance of skill sets? What are some 3
Well, the first one for me is safety, and I watch the back half of the fleet. The back half of the fleet struggling is when it's time to come back to the dock and take care of that. The second half goes to starting. We get a lot of times to start a fleet. We can put up flags and bring them back, and we can start them forever. But we only get one chance to finish them. So I always make sure that my finishing, I'm trying to mitigate this finishing risk, recognizing if I don't get that right, I'm going to have some really upset customers. And then the third thing is the starting, and course management. And I think my managing the course in my work, while it's 5 minutes of chaos at the start, it leads to an hour and a half of just trying to stay out in front. And I personally don't stop what I'm doing. I'm watching the wind and asking for other reports. And if you listen to my radio chatter, it's pretty consistent from the top and the bottom, trying to make sure that we're not caught by something. And I always tell everyone on my team, if you see something strange happening on the course, don't assume I've seen it. Use everyone's sets of eyes to see everything, and just please give me a report. Like, signal. You see this 20-degree right-hand shift, this big black puff coming in. No, but I do now. Thank you very much. And whether that happens, and you can have those come in from your weather mark as you're in sequence, and you realize, okay, it's going to take them 20 minutes to get to the top. It's a 20-degree shift. Should I just wait that 5 to 7 minutes and get it in and start that versus moving forward? So I think, as Ron said, you start managing your expectations in the morning and managing the risk and trying to minimize them to make the competition as fair as possible.
Great. Should we slide into mark management and just keep moving? Everybody happy with, how long a course to make and how many courses a day, and who's going to help you set a good course? Any other? We're good? Dick?
I'm wondering what the PROs we've assembled here think about setting the time that the competitors are on the water. And I started when I was working as PRO. I thought, well, people came to race. They paid their money to race. They traveled to race. I'm going to give them as many races as I can that are fair races. But then lately I've been hearing, well, it's the experience of the regatta. It includes the party in the evening. It includes not hurting the next day, not having been frozen out there if you're cold. And so I'm thinking I'm probably too tough in the terms of keeping running races. How do you, what's in your mind as you're thinking about, is that enough races for the day, or is this course too long, or whatever?
Yeah, I think it's all about communication with the folks that are there at the regatta and knowing what their expectations are, what they're looking for, what the kind of day is, whether it's a social group that wants that 3 races out so they can go back and have beers. When I first started doing PROs, one of my first national championships, I ran 5 races during a day because they said they wanted to run lots of races. I came ashore and I got confronted by a spouse who said, "You're a terrible race officer." And I just kind of looked at her and said, I thought I had a really good day. We had 5 superb races. And she says, "I bought $200 worth of cold cuts and they never had a chance for lunch."
And for me, it's safety, and it's the entire event. As far as how many races, it's safety. Watching that, I was at a regatta, and in the morning briefing, I said, the plan is for 4 races. And I got a bunch of hands that stuck up and said, "You sure about 4 races? We're thinking that may be a bit much." And so I said, "Tell you what, after the 3rd race, come by the signal boat, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if you want another race. The fleet will vote." And at the end of the day, they came by and gave me, it was 50-50. And the top won another race, the bottom didn't want another race. The bottom won. We all went in, and at the same time, the fleet was voting with their feet, because as they sailed by and said, "We want another race," they started sailing towards the harbor. So they won another race, but they wanted to be first to the beer. So I think that the race they were headed to. So your customers will tell you what they want. And I think that morning briefing is one of those things you can, if you're scheduling what you're doing and you say, we're going to run the schedules for 4 races a day, we're behind the race, any objections to that? And if you get enough people to put their hands up, say, okay, then we'll have to figure out another way, because some people want to eat lunch. Some people don't. We were talking outside when you're talking about how fast to run races, and John mentioned it, Jeremy mentioned it. They're out there managing time, and so from the last boat to finish to the next start is always that critical time when you're out there bouncing around, which is why I try and bring in a finish boat so that my starting line can be being set up. And as an Opti kid, as I overheard one day, talk to his coach, they're not giving him much time between races. His comeback was sail faster. So the back of the fleet's going to be upset with you because you're going to move into a new sequence really quick. The front people who've been already sitting around, waiting around for 15 minutes, are going to go, what's been taking so long? So I think you have to manage expectations of the fleet. As soon as you think everyone's kind of ready to go, you need to be able to move in the sequence. And if you feel some people aren't trying to get ready to go, as John and Ron had said, that you get on the horn and just say the next starts at 14, the next winning flag's at 1400. And it also gives them a heads up, and those guys who didn't seem to be very motivated can now know that they have a time certain that they're going to be motivated. So.
I think several of the competitors said to be considerate and respect their time. You know, everyone has a time budget. Don't waste people's time, and give them an expectation of what to expect. So again, you know, forward-looking, look at your forecast, talk to the smart people at the venue. What is going to be good. Sometimes, onshore postponements are a smart thing, that if you know you're just going to be wasting your time and the competitors are going to be bobbing around and out in the sun for hours at a time, don't, AP on shore. And again, time management, but again, communicate with them. This is why we're doing this, and respect their use of time too.
I think absolutely from a competitor standpoint, and I'd just like to reinforce that AP over a time frame, like we're going to be postponed for 1 hour or postponed for 2 hours, is one of the most respectful things that race management can do for the competitor's time resource.
Speaking of time resource, why don't we break if everybody's happy? Are there any questions? But maybe we'll break for lunch a little bit in a few now, and then we can get back at it.
So we're back
And we're back at 1.
Yeah, what's that?